Good evening. Welcome to the Arise Exchange right here on Arise News. I am Rotu Sodiri coming to you from the commercial capital of Africa's largest economy, Nigeria. Of course, we are in Lagos. Now, we're going to kick things off with the big news today. President Tinubu has inaugurated his Presidential Committee on Fiscal Policy and Tax Reform. There are a number of mandates that they have for this committee across three areas. Governance is one thing, tax reform is the second, and also revenue growth. Joining us to discuss this big news, of course, is the chair of the Presidential Committee on Fiscal Policy and Tax Reforms, Taiwo Oyedele. He joins us from our Abuja studios. Good evening to you, sir. Thank you so much for joining us. I want to quickly kick things off. Those three, the one-year mandate and those three areas, as far as the fiscal governance, tax reforms, growth facilitation, can you talk us through those three areas, sir?
Thank you very much, Rotus. It's a pleasure to be on your program. Yeah, you're right. The president today inaugurated the Presidential Committee on Fiscal Policy and Tax Reform, which I've been asked to share. And I consider this to be a privilege and humbled for that opportunity. As was rightly said by Mr. President, there are three pillars to the mandate of this committee. One of it is fiscal governance. The other one is tax reform, and the third one is growth facilitation. So what we mean by fiscal governance, or maybe I should say that these three pillars also have 5 dimensions. So those 5 dimensions include fiscal management, it includes tax policy review, it includes tax law reform, it includes competitiveness and business enabling, as well as revenue administration. So what that means is within a period of 1 year, which is the period that Mr. President has directed for this committee's work to be done, the work of the committee is divided into milestones. The first 30 days is for us to try and look for the quick wins. So those quick wins will be interventions that generally we have broad consensus in terms of stakeholders, but we haven't done so much about those reforms. So what is it that we can introduce within 30 days, particularly if you don't need to amend the law? And then within 6 months is when to do the critical reforms, and this would include repealing some of the laws that are obsolete or they come in the way of business and progress, and then harmonize the tax laws and maybe even rewrite all of them to make them simple, to make them more friendly, and also to make them more modern. And then 12 months is for implementation. One good thing about this committee is that it's not just an advisory committee where you're writing reports. It's also a committee where you're going to be supporting the government with implementation.
Now, the tax-to-GDP ratio, the goal 18% by next year, we of course understand that for 2021 was revised from single digits to 10.86. So how realistic is it to get to 18% tax-to-GDP ratio in a year? How can you achieve that?
Yeah, interesting question, Rotus. So we know that, the likes of the IMF, for example, prescribes a minimum of 15% tax-to-GDP ratio for you to meaningfully finance development for a country. And we know that the average tax-to-GDP ratio for Africa is in the region of 17 to 18%. So the target that has been set for this committee is to help Nigeria move towards 18% thereabout over the next 3 years. We're currently at about 10.86. If you look at the revised, numbers of tax-to-GDP ratio that was produced up until 2021 fiscal year. We don't know what the figure is for 2022 as of yet. But whatever that is, it shows that we're looking to roughly double our revenue from taxes over a period of 3 years. Also bear in mind that in that same 3 years horizon, we expect there should be some economic growth of around 4 to 6%. So you need to not only double the numbers as they are today, you need to also project for the growth in the economy. Where are we going to get it from? That's your question, and it's really a very important one. We do not want to introduce new taxes. In fact, we want to get rid of many of the taxes that we currently have that are not productive. So it would then seem counterintuitive that you're going to reduce the number of taxes that people pay, and yet you want to collect more. Here's where we're going to find the money from. The first one is a tax gap. We think that as of today, the tax gap is somewhere in the region of 20 trillion naira. And what that means is if you just focus on the major taxes, VAT, corporate income tax, personal income tax, there are people who, as of today, should be paying and they're not compliant. Some people and businesses are in the tax net with, I always say this, with just one finger. How do you get all the body to be inside of the tax net? That's the biggest one. The other areas where we think that we can make, generate revenue from is really bringing down the cost of collection. The cost of collection is so huge in Nigeria, despite collecting so little in revenue, particularly because you have too many agencies trying to collect revenue, and those are not their core mandates. So these agencies are actually being distracted from doing what they're supposed to be doing to support the economy. So take those functions away from them. They focus on their primary mandate, which means they facilitate economic growth. And the FRS, for example, would then collect those revenue more efficiently and save on the cost of collection. The other areas where we think we can also have some savings is just looking at incentives and ask yourself whether these incentives are productive. If you give away 1 naira and you're getting less than 1 naira in return, then maybe that's time for you. It's time for you to review those incentives. So these are some of the areas where we think that the growth in revenue will come from over the next 3 years.
Excellent. How will the committee work with other bodies like the JTB, like the Joint Tax Board?
Yeah, interesting question as well. So it's a large committee. We've got representation. I know this information is not yet in the public domain, and we're going to try and publish it over the next couple of days. So we have very broad representation across Nigeria because this is an issue that affects everyone. So professional bodies are represented, ICANN, CITN, Bar Association, ANAN. We have government institutions from Joint Tax Board to FRS to Customs Service to the Central Bank of Nigeria. You have the NIPC, that's Investment Promotion Commission. You have, even Ministry of Justice, Ministry of Finance, of course. You have Ministry of Trade, Industry and Investments, and a few others. And then you have various trade associations. The Manufacturers Association are represented. Women in business are represented. We have the Lagos Chambers of Commerce and Industry is represented. We have NASME, that's the Small and Medium Enterprises. You have even students, the University Tax Club students are going to be part of the support system for this initiative. The Nigeria Economy Summit Group is represented, and so on and so forth. So quite a large membership. So what we want to be able to do is, in fact, by just the constitution of the committee in and of itself means that you're able to work with agencies, not only at the federal level, but we're also able to work across, sub-national and even local government. The local government is also represented. The chairman of the Finance Commissioners Forum is also represented. JTB has about 6 members represented. So we are very comfortable and confident that this is a national committee, not federal government committee. And everybody has agreed that these are issues we must address for our country to move forward. And therefore, we believe that everybody is on board.
Speaking of everybody being on board, can you quickly tell us how integral the states are to the tax goals of the federal government, and maybe one day see the states with wiggle room to set their own independent tax rates to attract business?
Yeah, so I'm not sure we're at that point yet where we want states to start setting their own tax rate, because if we don't do that within a proper framework, what's going to happen is it becomes chaotic. Because you find that in large parts, many of the organizations that really have the volumes, and employing a lot of people, as well as across the value chain, suppliers here and there, distributors here and there, they tend to cut across states. We don't want to make doing business more difficult than it is currently. So what we are hoping would happen is that, one, we're able to harmonize the taxes we have now, hopefully to about a single digit across all levels of government, but then use technology to ensure that you get significant and reliable data about individuals and businesses. One, to be able to protect those who are vulnerable. So we should not be taxing poverty. If you're earning solely to living above poverty line, you shouldn't have to pay income tax at all. But then that also helps you to see who has the ability to pay and is not paying their fair share, to be able to collect that. Then if, for example, we're able to come up with a harmonized tax code, even for local government and states, you can then replicate that for states to adopt, so that they are not starting from scratch and we have some level of consistency across the country. So I do think that we'll get to a point, I don't know how quickly that will be, when states will be able to compete, I will say more by giving incentives to attract investment to their domain, and also people as well, I may relocate and go to another state if it's more friendly than the other, but not by imposing their own separate and different taxes, except to the extent that that's provided for in the law. It's more around saying personal income tax is within the purview of the state. So they should collect personal income tax, but it should be legislated at the center. Property taxes, for example, state and local government can collect it, but the law really regulating all of that can be driven centrally.
Taiwo Oyedele, the chair of the Presidential Committee on Fiscal Policy and Tax Reform, we thank you for taking the time to talk to us, and we hope to have you, of course, a year from now to see how these goals have been achieved. Thank you so much for your time.